Hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 39 of Montague Island Books. Now, if this is the first time you've listened to the show, don't worry, we'll explain the sort of the format and what it's all about as we go along. And as I say, this is our 39th show, and I'm delighted with our guest this evening. I'll just tell you a little bit about him, and then we will let him sort of explain more. So our guest this evening writes dark fiction and is the author of three gripping crime thrillers, Deadly Burial, Never Rest, and Rabbit Hole, as well as two collections of short horror fiction. His Disturbing Works, Volume 1 and 2. Cyberpunk thriller London 2039 Auxiliary, and his most recent release, a psychological techno thriller, The Warden. So we'll look forward to finding out more about him. He lives in London and spends some of his time hiding in the guise of his sinister alter ego, an accountant called Dave. And when he isn't counting beans, he's a self-confessed nerd who loves, he's written this, by the way, not me. He's a self-confessed nerd who loves books, films, and video games. He said basically any way to tell a great story. And I'll let him explain all about his website and whatever. He also hosts a fortnightly dark fiction podcast called Dark Natter, and you can find that at any sort of podcast place, but I'm sure our guest will tell you more about that. So very good evening to Jon Richter. Is it Richter or Richter?
Well, given that it's a fake name, you can probably pronounce it however you like. But I think the official pronunciation, or more accurately, the way the person who I've stolen it from pronounces it is Richter, because I think it's German, and I think it means judge. So maybe I should have just gone with that. Jon Judge.
Jon Judge, yeah.
That is it. Richter is. Have you ever seen the movie Total Recall? The Arnold Schwarzenegger.
A long time ago.
He goes to Mars. So in that movie, he's not even the main villain. It's like the henchman of the main villain is this kind of like balding, lanky bloke called Richter. And I just thought, the idea that he's got to fight blooming Schwarzenegger, it was like a metaphor for my own life. Like it felt very, I could relate to his struggles.
Love it. Anyway, welcome to the show. And perhaps you can start, Jon, for those who may be listening in and, haven't come across your books and what have you. And obviously you've got quite a lot of different genres. So tell us a little bit about yourself other than what I've just mentioned, and about your books and where people can contact you, etc.
Yeah, no, of course. And thank you. Thanks ever so much for having me on. Pleasure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I write sort of across different genres, and I try to sort of loosely group that under the heading dark fiction. And what I mean by that is basically just I like nasty, creepy, unpleasant stuff, but just in different genres. So I do like crime fiction, which I know a lot of people do. So I've written a few of those, as you correctly said earlier. My most recent sort of pure crime book, if that makes sense, is a book called Rabbit Hole that came out in 2020. That's probably been my most successful and well-received book to date. So I'm proud of all my books. All writers are always proud of all their books, but that one seems to have landed the best. But I don't, unlike a lot of other writers, that's not a criticism, I think they just have a favorite genre that they read and write in, whereas I probably hop around a bit. So as well as the crime stuff, I like science fiction. I like you've got science fiction, you can then split into like hard sci-fi and less. So you've got like real kind of complex concepts of going into all the technology. I to date haven't had a crack at one of those. Mine's probably more on the kind of fun, daft side. I like to explore some interesting big topics and what the world might be like in the future, but it's kind of through the lens of there's usually a murder involved, there's usually some sort of detective angle, and hopefully a bit of fun. So yeah, my most recent book, I think you'd probably call, rather than science fiction, you'd probably call it a techno thriller. So it's in effect, it's a contemporary thriller, but with elements of near future technology in it. And that was The Warden that came out last year. I've actually got that here so I can waft through.
Yeah, let's have a look. Very nice, very nice.
So this is where the warden in the title is basically the AI that runs a kind of smart apartment building. So it's COVID fiction. So it's set in a few years' time. It's, you know, lockdown never ended. We're all trapped indoors. No one can go outside.
There's another shelf that the bookshops will have to make room for.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly right. It gets a bit tricky to pigeonhole them. And then I did have a crack at almost like a full-blown kind of cyberpunk thriller. And I think what you find is quite a lot of people don't know what cyberpunk is, and that's totally understandable because it's a little bit niche. But in effect, it means stuff that's like Blade Runner. But we'll cover that, mate. We'll come back to that later because that might crop up in my book choices for the island.
It might just. So, first of all, like maybe going back to the beginning, I presume you do a lot of reading because you read all these different genres. I presume you must be like quite a, you know, go through quite a number of books during the year.
I'll quickly showcase me sort of nerd selves. But
Nice.
The thing is, it's not all books. In there, you've got, you know, books, graphic novels, DVDs. I've got my video games in the other room. So I guess, yeah, it's like I love stories and I like new things. So any new book that's got interesting idea, I'm kind of like an ideas person.
Yeah.
So a lot of my stuff it tends to be, there's something a bit weird and hopefully original about it. So the crime thriller I mentioned, Rabbit Hole, that is about like an investigative podcaster who reopens a cold case. So half the book is just transcripts of this fictional podcast, and the other half is her kind of investigating and getting more and more drawn into the rabbit hole. So it's I love reading. I've always tried to have at least one book on the go at once. Ideally, try to keep it to not more than to manage. But it might not be, I don't necessarily get my inspiration from books. It might be films, it might be a TV series, it might be a video game. I'm a big video games person, but again, from a story perspective.
Yeah.
So I don't want to sit there all night and just mindlessly play on Call of Duty. No offense. In fact, offense to people who do, because it's boring.
Yeah, so, just shooting, isn't it? Just
shoot.
So you're into like world building and things like that.
Exactly right. That's it. So the interactive nature of that medium, I think, gives you an opportunity. If you're a storyteller, you can tell stories in a really interesting, a different way, make them more, you know, inherently very immersive. So I like to sort of consume stories across different genres, different mediums, but they're always always sort of dark ones. And as you mentioned, I have had a crack at sort of full-blown horror stuff, albeit to date I've only ever written that in a kind of shorter format. And that's what my sort of Jon Richter's disturbing works are. Again, hopefully a bit of fun rather than too kind of miserable, but definitely dark.
So how do you, because you're writing in like 4, 5, 6 different genres, how do you go on with the writing process? Do you sort of sit down and think, right, I'm now going to write a cyberpunk story, or do you just start a story and see how it goes? And do you when you're writing in the different genres, do you need to use a different head, so to speak?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think it's probably 2 parts of the answer. So what happens with writing is you get an idea. Oh, right, I've got this idea. This is a big idea. Right, I need to write this. This is good. This one's got legs. I can do this. And occasionally it fails dismally and you give up after 10,000 words. You're like, oh, that was crap. But most of the time you kind of, maybe this comes a bit with experience. You get a feel for like, oh no, this is definitely a book here. Or it might be that you've got 2 separate ideas and you're a bit, and then they kind of suddenly, I can do both of them in one book. Yes. Yeah. So like, and then you're away. And the idea will kind of tell you what genre it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then in terms of your different head, you're definitely changing your voice a little bit in how, like one of my unpublished books, which is, you know, sitting on a shelf gathering dust. and maybe this is why. I wrote a fantasy novel, which Donna, I know you have read and you liked it, so that was much appreciated. To date, that has not yet found a home, and that one, I think maybe its challenges. I wanted to write that in a pretty old school, quite po-faced, not quite kind of thou and that kind of stuff, but a little bit into that sort of territory of like old-fashioned fantasy. And I'm not sure publishers are looking for that. So I think, yeah, you sort of choose the voice you're going to write in, and it hopefully fits the genre, and you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, that's what well explained. And what you've explained sort of all the books you've got out and what have you, and as you were saying, rabbit holes, you sort of most popular one. What's next?
Oh yes, well, later this year, currently scheduled for September. Still needs to go through an editing process and proofreading and all that. Proofreading is honestly, like, I'm a perfectionist, like, gotta be perfect. And whenever you go into a proofreading process, you're like, right, you're not going to find a thing in there. There's no typos.
Famous last words.
And honestly, they always find absolutely shed loads. It's like, oh, did you know that you've said that it's summer, and then in chapter 8 you've said it's winter? Oh my God. I'm sure that'll happen. But that's we're back to kind of crime thriller. It's a bit political, but which I may, need to be careful. I don't, go a bit too far down that route. But I did want to explore a little bit about, this country is at the moment incredibly politically volatile. You've got Labour kind of on the ascendancy, and other parties maybe less so at the time of recording, but we'll see. And obviously, being a northerner who lives in, like, I'm from Wigan, I live in London.
All right.
You do, maybe, or I have found you do start to notice a bit of that north-south divide as well when you move. So I thought that would be interesting to explore through the lens of a murder mystery. And I'm having a crack at a kind of, the structure of the book is, I think, an original thing that hasn't been done, although often you have an original idea and it turns out someone else has already had it. But I'm trying to do, like, every single chapter is from a different character's perspective. But it's not different perspectives of the same incident. It's more like a chronological pass the baton. So chapter 1 is Jon waffling on about books. Chapter 2 might be Joe switches off the recording. Blimey, that bloke could talk. I'm glad that's over. Chapter 3 is Donna. Do you know what I mean? And it kind of, So we'll see how that pans out in its finished version, but it is as yet untitled. So watch this space.
Untitled, right? So that's an interesting thing as well with the title. I'm presuming, but basically, a lot of the genres that you're writing are quite sort of, although they're quite wide, is sort of being narrowed down to a sort of a niche in a way. I mean, it's not just crime. It's So does that affect your title and your cover?
Yeah. 100%. So a number of my books, either I've had an original title that the publisher didn't like, and then I managed to come up with one they did like, and I was happy and it was okay. In one case, I don't like to offend prior publishers, but it's a true statement. Is my very first book was called Deadly Burial, and I wanted that book to be called Whatever Happened to Vic Valiant, because it's a book about a murdered professional wrestler. So I had this idea that, like, you've got like an 80s iconic wrestler that you might remember from the good old days. No, whatever happened to him? And it turns out he was murdered, and there's a murder mystery. And the publisher wasn't keen, and they sort of, this is what it's going to be called. And I, especially as a debut author, you don't have a clue what you're doing. You're just like, oh God, this is all a bit overwhelming. So I kind of just said, oh yeah, okay. And I don't like the title of that book. Although, to be fair to them, Deadly Burial is actually quite a clever wrestling pun, because a burial in wrestling means you were the one who lost and had to pretend to get beaten up in the ring. So it's not a bad title, but that's the one that when I'm telling people my books, it just sticks a little bit with me that I don't really like that title. And I think it's probably what I've learned there is you do have to stand your ground for things that are important to you. So I think if you don't like the title, or you don't like the front cover that's been designed, then it probably is right for you to just hold your ground a bit. And then just a final thought on this is the short story horror stuff I've self-published, because I just thought, let's see what that's like. And it is dead fun being able to you've got complete creative control over the cover. And that is quite rewarding. Obviously, the downside is it's a lot harder to market than myself without a publisher's support.
I can imagine, but all part of the learning process, though, isn't it? Now, there is actually a connection here, a strong connection with another author that we've had on the show. And I'm going to put Donna on the spot now and ask Donna, can she work out the connection?
Pressure.
Do you want to kick yourself when you find out, Donna? There is a certain other author we've had on the show who is based in Wigan and has also has written about wrestling.
Is that Malcolm?
Hollingdrake.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was desperately trying to remember which is the other Wiganer who I've met.
I can't remember the connection over wrestling because I've got the books, but I've not read them all because I've been busy with other things yet. But and I remember hearing him in an interview mentioning about he'd been to this gym in, I think it was Lee, to see this wrestling guy. So it must appear in one of his books, and I say he's from Wigan as well. So,
well, it was I don't know if it sort of still is, but one back in the day, it was like a real kind of hotbed for wrestling, I believe, in the 80s or whatever.
Yeah. And earlier, I mean, it was big in the 80s, like Wigan and St Helens and all that kind, and Manchester were really big in wrestling in like the 70s. But but I believe like even
I made that up. There was a place called the Snake Pit where they all used to train, I think.
Rings a bell, yeah. That might be actually where Malcolm went.
Well, that would explain it actually. I think that's the one that's like the historical, like when people talk about like Wigan Casino and all these Wigan Pier, famous old places that aren't there anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, Wigan Pier is still there, but not the pier.
I will have to tell Malcolm to watch this, and then anyway, that's something else. But it was just when you said Wigan and wrestling, I thought, ooh, connection.
Well, just last thing on that is, of course, the guy. I don't know if anyone remembers the British Bulldog, the wrestler. Like he was from Wigan, but because the big WWF, as it used to be called, or WWE.
That's not proper wrestling, though, is it?
Well, but he ended up joining that, didn't he? And then so he became quite a big star. But of course, no one in America has ever heard of Wigan, have they? No. So when he came out, he had to announce that he was from somewhere else that they've heard of. So usually he'd get away with like Manchester. But sometimes he'd be quick and be like, in my hometown of London, England. And it's like, you're clearly not from London, mate.
Well, I come from Skelmersdale, so I've got like the Wigan know-how kind of thing to a certain extent, but
definitely. There you go, close by.
So, but no, defected to Cumbria. But anyway, as I say, digress. But I'm sure Malcolm will be, if he watches this video, he'll be interested in the connection.
I will confess to my shame, I didn't realise Malcolm had written some wrestling stuff.
But I can't remember what it was. Donna might know because I think Donna's read most of the books. Can you remember what it is about the wrestling, Donna?
It's the phrase, and I think it's Catch as Catch Can, which is his Merseyside series. I think it's that phrase, but I can't remember exactly the link. But Malcolm had to tell me when I read it. So
that's like a style of wrestling or something, I think. Yeah. Probably got that completely wrong.
Well, anyway, moving on. But that's interesting. So, have you you've obviously got books out in paperback and in ebook and things like that. Are any of the books out in audiobook? Because we do have a lot of people who
No, it's not yet is the answer. So there is one. It's been in the pipeline for a little while. I should probably check in on when that's due to release. But yeah, my most recent book, The Warden, is the first time where the publishers sold the rights, as it were, to an audiobook company. So that is on its way, but to date, but as yet, no audiobooks, I am afraid.
And I don't want you to give any names, but have you had a think, or have you got an idea of who you would like to read your books?
Oh, well, I mean, so as part of the process, I didn't know this, but you get like sent a clip of the actor that they're proposing because you're supposed to like sign off on it. And he had a lovely voice. So I said, yes, it's fine. And so because one of the characters in The Warden is this AI called James, I think the actor, I forget the actor's name, but to my shame, but it does lend itself to that sort of Stephen Fry-esque sort of. Now, I think Stephen Fry is probably a very popular answer to that question. It would be interesting, I guess, to have the complete opposite, or not the opposite, but someone with a very different, maybe someone with like a strong regional accent or something like mine or whatever. That would also be interesting. But I think it works. I think it'll be a good fit for the story.
And also just connected with that in a way, when you're writing a book, do you get, you obviously build up your character and you've got an idea, but do you ever try to put like an actor in it, as you know, that you can actually in your own head?
It's a weird one for me. I think I visualize books as in quite a film-like way. So it's like a series of scenes. So, and then the scenes are, it's like you're imagining them happening as if you're watching a film, but then the people, the characters are more, you don't necessarily see these kind of, I know it'd be very different for different authors. In my world, they're quite vague faces. Yeah. So it's like, oh, well, this character is going to be, I don't know, a really muscle-bound, tall, white, bald bloke, let's say. and then when you're writing the little pen picture of them, you know, you're describing the character, well, I need a few more details, and you're almost kind of coming up with them and you're kind of surprising yourself. Oh, right, okay, so he's got like one ear missing. Yeah, cool, that's good. Like, that's modified my mental picture. So it's not so much a clear picture based on a real person that you're then describing. It's a vague picture that you're making up as you go along, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah. So it's like a fuzzy image, it gets clearer as you go along, I suppose. Yeah, that's great. That definitely does make sense. So tell us, Jon, if people want to sort of buy the books and, you know, find out more about you, etc., how and where do they do that?
Yeah, well, thank you again for the opportunity to shamelessly plug me ways. So yeah, if anyone's intrigued by my weird dark stuff, so there's a few avenues. I've got a website which is www.jon-richter.com. It's Jon is Jon. I dropped the H because I thought that sounded cooler. And that's a weird website with all my other side projects. I'm quite active on Twitter, so you can find me at Richter Writes. You can search me on Facebook and Instagram as well, but I'm probably a bit less good on those platforms. And I'm not on TikTok, and I'm never going to be.
Never say never. Donald will probably get you on TikTok at some point, I'm sure.
It's like a step two anyway. Maybe I'll tell you that. And then the other one to just look out for, as you mentioned before, is just the podcast. So it's currently on mid-season hiatus, but Dark Natter, which is a very good pun. If I do say so myself, not sure the show is any good, but the pun title is great. It's just me and my mate Liam having a chat about all the weird dark films and books and stuff that we like, and we sometimes have guests on. Donna herself has been on as a guest in the past, so that's worth a listen. And you can find that basically, if you search for Dark Natter, you'll find it on various platforms, but you just have to tell Google that you really did mean Dark Natter, because it'll autocorrect Dark Matter. Exactly. So
I can see you've been searching for your own show there.
Just like any listeners. No. Well, slowly going very slowly.
Great, wonderful. So now there was one other thing. I know a lot of people listening like the idea of signed books. So is that a possibility for people?
Definitely. It always makes me, I am being a niche writer of weird books. I'm not flooded with requests for signed copies, but occasionally when I get one, it's lovely. So yeah, again, contact any of the aforementioned media, but probably Twitter is the best one. At Richter Writes, and I'd be more than happy to arrange a signed book.
I always ask that because a lot of people are interested, and particularly, I mean, it's thankfully changing now that we're coming out of lockdown, but obviously when we were in lockdown, people wanted to get a signed book, but we couldn't go to book festivals, etc. So it was like, so I asked because I know there are quite a few that watch that, that are interested in that kind of thing. Right. So what we'll do now, Jon, is we will start to pack your bags, so to speak, for your trip to the island. Now, for anyone who's watching or listening for the first time, Montague Island is a fictional island off the coast of Cumbria. So don't think it's going to be all sunshine and sea. And the book was actually, the island was actually created by Mike Craven. in one of his books. So I'll let you read all of them to work out which book it's in, but there we go. And that's where the name come from, of Montague Island, because I'm based in Cumbria as well. So it just seems sort of opportune. And basically you get to pick 7 books that can be things from childhood or things that you read regular, or things that you just want to be able to sit down and have time to read and and go over again. You also get to take with you to the island a CD, a DVD, a food item or food ingredient, and a luxury item. And we can be a bit, because it's a fictional island, we can be a bit sort of a bit clever in what we choose, etc. So that is the idea. And then we pack you off to the island, and away it goes. So we'll start going through your book. So what is the first book that you've chosen, John?
I thought I'd start with one of the ones that I've still got in physical form. When you lose books or you lend them to someone, they want them back. So some of these I've got, some of these I haven't anymore, sadly. But this one I have got. So it's Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. Don't know if anyone is familiar with this.
No, not.
It looks like a textbook. It's like a big, thick,
big one, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's bonkers, right? It's when I've got a mate called Steve who's into all the same weird dark stuff that I am, and so any recommendation from Steve tends to be usually he knows oh, this is for you. So I thought, right, Steve's recommended this, I'm going to buy it. And it's masquerading as, it starts off as a bloke who is, this guy called Johnny Truant, who's like a kind of depressed, lots of mental health problems. And he's found this book. I think he finds it in a hidden room in his apartment or whatever. And then the book that he finds it starts off as like this, it's like a book about, let me get this, trying to articulate this. It's like a critique of a movie, but then the movie itself, which is fictional, is then a movie about a house. And the movie about the house it starts off as, there's just some renovation project. Measurements, they work out that there's just 1 inch different on the outside dimensions and on the inside dimensions, which can't possibly be true. The house can't be 1 inch bigger on one inside than it is outside. So then I think after a few weeks of becoming increasingly obsessed with this, the man who's moved into the house, he then finds there's a door that wasn't there before. And if he opens the door, there's just this massive corridor that can't possibly be there, because if you go outside, there's no space for it to exist in. So then he descends and goes into this corridor, follows it around, follows his staircase down. And I won't spoil too much, having said from the beginning, but he uncovers this massive sprawling labyrinth that's kind of impossible, but yet it's there inside his house. And as you read it, so you've got these multiple layers of the review of the movie, and then the comments written by Johnny on the review that he's found, and it's like this tapestry of all these crazy, and it starts to kind of deteriorate into all these that upside down.
That looks heavy.
and so you get to a point where you're reading it and you're literally like rotating the book around, trying to work out which way up it's meant. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this book is like, the book is reading me. I'm not even reading the book. And you felt like you've got this malign, evil object in your hands. And it was almost like a moment, like, I will get this off. So yeah, loved it. It was like a really interesting experience that you wouldn't have with any other book, I would say.
What genre would you call that?
Horror.
Horror.
I think horror.
Yeah, because it was a bit of like all sorts, wasn't it? But talking about recommendations, because you go on about dark fiction a lot, I'm going to recommend one to you.
Please do.
That you might have already read. But to me, it's the darkest book I've ever read, and I read it. I read it last year. It's that dark. I think I put in my review something like, "It's that dark it should be written in charcoal," and that is Louise Mullin's "Love You Bad."
Oh no, I am aware of Louise for sure, but I haven't read that book.
Yeah, read the book.
Right.
Your version of dark might be different to mine, but it's like, to me, it's like so dark. It's just like
it's really hard to explain as well, the whole dark
it
thing.
is, isn't it?
Well, like if you're a fan of like horror films, people will, some people, not all people, because everyone likes different things, but they'll be like, oh, well, isn't that really depressing? And it's like, well, it can kind of be fun. You can have, for a start, you can have funny horror, daft, schlocky, hammer horror, heads flying off. But even when it's more like this book, House of Leaves, is not played for laughs. It's serious and kind of intense. But it's, I don't know, I don't find that heavy going. I found it kind of, I can't wait to see what's on the next, but what more mad, weird stuff am I going to find? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you totally, because I think that's why so many people, certainly in the UK, like crime fiction, because it can be very, for what you want to use, using that word again, dark, but and it can be very harrowing, particularly with a lot of the sort of like psychological books that are available now, the psychological thrillers and things like that. They are very, very harrowing and, cover a lot of sort of taboo subjects in a way. And, so I think like that kind of explains that side of it, is like people read dark stuff to make them feel happier.
I know, and it's all really subjective. It's like if I watch like a true crime documentary, to me that's like, oh, just a little light viewing while I'm having my tea, which I know is whereas if it's like a 2.5 hour gangster movie, I find them really heavy. I always come out of, if you watch like The Irishman or something, and you come out of it and I'm a bit kind of knackered and a bit depressed. It doesn't really make any sense, but
it is hard to judge, because when you think of, like, I love my music and I listen to a lot of blues music, and a lot of people think, well, why do people listen to blues music? Because it's just going to make you, make you sort of more down. But it's surprising. It doesn't. It send you the other way and lifts you. So and I suppose it's the same with books as well. So it's just getting, everybody's different, isn't it? Which is great, because it's something, it's like there was a book I was just reading reviews about, and some people were, just the other day, and some people were saying, oh, this is the best book that's ever been, and then others only got 50 pages in and gave up. It was rubbish.
Yeah, and things that are divisive, I like, even if I don't like the thing, I like the fact that it's divisive. Like that makes it inherently more interesting. Like if everyone's telling you something's crap, sometimes you're like, oh, I kind of want to read it just to see if it is or not.
Anyway, that's your first book. So that's House of Leaves, which sounds very complicated and something that you'd really have to concentrate on. But great.
Definitely will be unlike anything you've ever read before.
Yeah, it's only. So what's your second book, John?
So my second book is, I know this is all it's a bit childish, isn't it? This idea of, oh, well, that's my favourite. Oh, well, that's my second favourite. And that's my third. So for years, this next book was my favourite book until I read House of Leaves. And then it kind of got knocked off the pedestal.
Knocked off its perch.
But it's Use of Weapons by Ian M. Banks.
All right.
So Ian Banks, obviously, not obviously, we know, he's a now sadly deceased Scottish author who wrote, dozens of books, including, his most famous one was The Wasp Factory, which is the one that a lot of people have heard of, which is actually his debut. He wrote some other really famous, successful things like The Crow Road. I think that got made into a TV series, and I am forgetting his many other excellent books. But he also had a sci-fi alter ego called Ian M. Banks, and he wrote a load of really, really, like, it wasn't sci-fi set in a sort of plausible near future. It was a really, 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 really distant utopian kind of future, where there's this society called the Culture, who is basically, in the way that the USA were, at one point we just thought they were unassailable mega power that couldn't ever be competed, which is kind of not true anymore.
Yeah.
And so on. But at one point they were just the world police, like that movie. Yeah, like the world police kind of thing. So the Culture, in effect, is the sort of, I guess, the sort of intergalactic police, in effect. So they are the sort of dominant. It's not a race; it's a pan. They've kind of absorbed. They welcome people from. So it's almost like the logical conclusion of a kind of libertarian, sort of democratic kind of society. So it's a bit like what Earth will be like.
Wow.
Maybe, or some people hope. a long way in the future, and then how it might deal with problems and challenges that arise and all the weird stuff you encounter in the universe. Anyway, without I can do this without spoilers. So this story is a bit more human focused than that, all that kind of galactic stuff, and it's the structure. You know, I sort of mentioned earlier about books with interesting structures. This one is genius. It's got the first chapter is, you know, chapter 1, but then the next chapter in Roman numerals is like chapter 50, and then the next chapter is chapter 2, and then the next chapter is chapter 49.
Wow.
And they're both, so one of them is chronological from now going forward. The other one is in the future coming backwards. They're both telling the story of the same character, but in the current going forwards, he's a, you know, successful, up and coming, you know, good person fighting for the justice, and he's a warrior and some, you know, small scale military. Whereas the one in the future coming backwards, he's just like a broken husk of a depressed, suicidal, you know, any minute now he's just going to off himself. And so what you realize is, oh, the climax of the book is where the two plots
in the middle
meet, and it's going to show us what happened to result in him becoming this kind of shell remnant of himself. And that, I thought that was genius.
Wow, yeah, that's clever, that, isn't it? That takes some planning.
Yeah. Oh, and then sometimes you read a book and you're just like in awe of it, and you're like, oh, you know, I bow down at the feet of this writer. Like, that's amazing.
Now, you were just mentioning about how it was Ian Banks writes on, you know, like he adds an extra initial or whatever, you know, for different genres. Do you use the same name across all your books? Or?
Yeah, and I sometimes I think that was probably a crap idea, because I think writing in different genres does confuse your audiences a bit. Oh, and it is audiences plural, because you do find that some read cyberpunk fans, some of them only like science fiction and cyberpunk, some crime thriller. Weirdly, they like romance and crime, it would seem, is a weird demographic crossover that seems to be quite common. But anyway, so it's you're not always selling your books to the same people, and then, or if you have got fans of a book, they might be a bit confused. Oh, I thought you did crime books, now you've released this sci-fi thing, oh, now it's a horror thing. Well, which is it, John? And so I think, yeah, maybe in retrospect,
well, John, Stephen King can get away with it, so
exactly, that's the template. Yeah.
If you can get away with it, anyone can. And what made you, I mean, you might not want to answer this one, and that's fine if you don't, but what made you what made the decision to use another name rather than your own name?
Well, it was great question. It was basically when I got that first publishing deal for the debut, the wrestling one, you just get sent a contract to sign, and it's just got in it like, what's your name, what's your pen name? And I suddenly thought, ooh, this would be fun. And then, and also, because I work as an accountant, so, you know, I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm David Derbyshire, that's my real name. So if anybody wants to search him, it's a lot more boring.
If you need an accountant,
And so you kind of, I thought it might be good to try and keep the two things separate, so it didn't get all too mashed together. And to date, I've never managed to accidentally write John on any work emails and David on any book ones, but one day I'll mess that up. And then I just thought, well, what would be I can have a cooler name. So I sort of racked my brains and thought, oh yeah, Richter. Oh, I like the sound of that. That sounds good. So yeah, and then John was like, I suppose I just thought, if you've gone for the cool sounding surname, you can't then have a cool first name as well, because that's just going.
No, you couldn't have like Fred Richter or something like that, could you?
You know what I mean? I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't be like Denzel Richter. That would have just been too much. So John, settled on John.
Great, lovely story behind that as well. So that's Use of Weapons is your second book. So what's your third book going to be?
My third book is the first one that annoyingly I can't find, even though I'm positive it's here somewhere. And that's The Dark Portal by Robin Jarvis.
Right.
Now, The Dark Portal it's a kid's book in that I think he genuinely, it is a kid's book. It is young person's fiction, and I got it when I was at primary school. You know this, when they probably still haven't, but like a book fair where like you go into the assembly hall and there's like some traveling bookshelves with books on them.
Yeah.
And I don't know what, I think it was just the cover, that drew me to it when I was about, 8 or something. And it's just two mice cowering before this big dark, literally a dark portal, like the title, with these two burning eyes in it. And I was like, oh, cool, yeah, I'm going to read that. And it's horrible. The book is it's like a mice that live in an abandoned building in Deptford. So it's the Deptford Mice trilogy. And they're kind of at war with these rats that live in the sewers underneath the city. There's head decapitations, blooming torture, really tragic romance where one of them, spoiler alert.
I imagine you had quite a shock after reading it as a child to read it again as an adult.
So I actually went back and I did read it again as an adult quite recently, and it was great. I enjoyed it. It was brilliant. I thought it was really good. There's a full-blown, there's a rat that's like renounced the rat god, which is the thing that lives in the dark portal, and he's worshipping some ancient old blood god, and then he gets, ends up another rat chops his head off or something. And I'm thinking, how did Robin Jarvis get this into a kid's book? Like, good on him.
You wouldn't want to give Robin Jarvis Ferrobino, would you?
Well, I tweeted about it, and I loved this when this happened, because like a lot of people slag off Twitter, and it's a bit of a toxic swamp if you're not careful, and all this stuff. But I have had lots of positive experiences on there. So Robin Jarvis replied to me tweets, and I got to have like a little chat with him on Twitter about it. And if you look at his bio, he's still going, still on Twitter. Obviously, he's got a blue tick because he's proper famous. Yeah. And it says mouse killer, like writer and mouse killer. And I was like, yes, he hasn't changed.
Yeah, so wouldn't want to be involved in any of it, his therapy, but it could coming out with stuff like that. But there we go. I wonder what made him think of that idea, for that book. Always makes me wonder on things like that. How does he possibly come up with that idea? Anyway, that's a great one. So that's the Dark Portal. So what's book number 4 that you're taking to the island?
Book number 4, also lent out and not recovered, so I can't showcase that one. But it's Killing Floor by Lee Child. So this is a Jack Reacher novel. It's the first Jack Reacher novel.
Yeah.
And I have read every single Jack Reacher novel.
Wow.
Up to I'm not going to read them now that he's kind of licensed it off to his brother or whatever it is.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Not that I'm saying I begrudge his. I get it. It's not. I'm not being too down on that. It's just. I think the character's kind of run its course now. And
I mean, how many books? It's like how many?
30 maybe.
Yeah, so it's a lot, isn't it? Yeah.
And it wasn't that the quality deteriorated over time. It was actually quite up and down. So I put some of the early books I actually don't like that much, and some of the later ones I enjoyed. But it's just a larger than life, really fun character, but really well plotted. Very kind of good. I can't believe how he can come up with so many ideas for the same character. Like, good on him. And the writing is good. It's like very, very punchy, short sentences. This happened, then this happened, then this guy did this, and it fits the character perfectly because he's this ex-military,
rapid fire stuff. Yeah.
So the first time I read that, I think I was like 15. And he's Reacher's dead cool, isn't he? He's like a big giant, massive hulking brute, but not so clever. And, all the villains get their comeuppance, and Reacher just batters them mercilessly. And I just loved every second of reading that book. So,
And the same good, but it was like the first one in the series, which did he say is like, must be 30 books or whatever now. So that's...
And one other thing worth commenting on, actually, is my 2 favourite Reacher novels, which is that one followed by, I think it's the 8th one, which is called Persuader. It might be called The Persuader, but I think it's just called Persuader. The vast majority of them are written in third person, but those 2 are written in first person. And I think that must be a factor in it, that I think I enjoyed the ones where you're kind of inhabiting Reacher a bit more than reading about him. But not sure why.
Perspective, Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so that is number 4. So what's your next book? Number 5.
5th one would be, well, we touched on Cyberpunk and Blade Runner, so I have picked a Philip K. Dick book, which I have got a copy of here, which is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Which of course is the book.
Great title, love the title.
His titles are amazing, and a lot of them got changed for the movie. So this is the book that Blade Runner was based on, and Blade Runner was the title. But Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep definitely a better title. Like I mentioned Total Recall before, didn't I, where I stole the name Richter from. That's based on a Philip K. Dick novel, but the Philip K. Dick, possibly a short story, is called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. So that is long titles were great.
Yeah, mate, just adds that extra dimension, does it? Sometimes when when you've got a long title and it's like, what?
It's a bit different. Like there's one, I've got one on my shelf here, one of his books called "Flow My Tears," the policeman said. I just think that's really good.
Oh, very random but good. Yeah. So yeah, that's a strange one. So what's number 6 that you're taking with you?
Number 6 is another. In fact, to be fair, I think this was a book I borrowed off someone and then didn't give it back.
So you got your own back there, yeah.
Obviously revealed, but I've lost it now. It's called The Unconsoled by Katsuo Ishiguro. And it's really thick, long one, and it's like inhabiting a nightmare for a really painfully long time that doesn't even really wake up from at the end. And what I mean when I say inhabiting a nightmare is it's not, oh, and there was blood and guts, and because obviously Ishiguro is a really subtle kind of intelligent kind of writer. It's more like the main character's in a rush to get somewhere. It's really important that he's not late, but then he stops because his car's broke down, and then someone pulls over to help him, but then that person's got a sick cat that needs to go to the vet. So okay, so I'll take your cat to the vet. Then he goes to the vet, but then the vet's got some problem. He has to help the vet. And in a dream, you kind of blunder from one to the other, and everything changes. So to me, it was like reading what my bad dreams are like. And it was really harrowing, uncomfortable read, but in a very clever way.
Yeah, you certainly don't have some interesting reading when you're on this island, because it's like it's covering all the genres there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's
right. So that's number 6. And what's your final book going to be?
And then the big finale one is another one that I got recently, and I do have it here, is this book by Simon Stalenhag called The Electric State. He is oh my God, I've forgotten what country he's from. Scandinavian, I'll go with that because that covers a few.
Yeah.
He's like an artist and writer. So all the book is like, I don't know if this comes across, but it's like really ace painted.
Wow, yeah.
Kind of like a novella almost.
Yeah.
And the pictures are like, they're almost kind of photorealistic.
Like a coffee table book, isn't it?
Very much so, but a really weird dark sci-fi one. So this one is about this kind of like post-apocalyptic. There's all these like destroyed old robots and mechs just littering the ground, and the Earth's kind of virtually deserted, and it's just this girl who needs to drive. She goes on this big road trip basically. Yeah. So it's all these it's all very still and quite slow-paced story with lots of flashbacks, and feels kind of melancholy and sad and cool. And he's written a few books now. His newest one, I've forgotten what it's called, The Labyrinth, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And so not only have you got the books and the art, but he does soundtracks that he makes himself as well. How talented do you want to be? So you can read and look at his work while listening to his album on Spotify.
That's a clever man, isn't it? That, yeah.
Annoyingly clever man, yeah.
Artist, author, and like composer, or it's like, wow.
Yeah. Polymath, they call them, don't they? People who can do everything.
Yeah, well, that's great. So you've got 7 brilliant books. They're all very different. And you're going to have a lot of fun on the island going through all of them.
Yeah, I was quite happy with that lot, actually.
That's great. Really sort of different, and books I hadn't heard before, which is because you tend to always get sort of, well, not always, but quite often, the similar books.
Yeah, but people they have, as we were saying before, I suppose, if people are into a particular genre and, crime, people who only read crime thrillers will have that. You'll get the big famous crime book, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So now we believe that on this fictitious island off the coast of Cumbria, Montague Island, that there is a little bit of electricity. You get about an hour of electricity every day. So as well as your books to take along with you, you're allowed to take a CD. Now, obviously, a CD can be, it can be like a mixed a playlist that you put together, or it can be, your favourite music, or whatever it may be. So what are you going to take with your CD?
So it was a tough one, this, and I explained why. Is I, a bit like me sort of fiction tastes, I quite like sort of dark, spiky, unpleasant kind of music, but not
like heavy rock kind of.
No, not really. So that, to me, that's a bit like offend fans of heavy rock now or whatever. It's all subjective, each to their own. To me, that's a bit unsubtle. So that's a bit like, "Raw, we're gonna smash you in the face with the horror," and it's like, that can be fun. But I prefer my music to be a bit more sort of unpleasant and dark in a slightly more cerebral way, maybe. So my favourite band is a band called The Fall, who are like a post-punk.
Were they Manchester? Was it Manchester?
Salford, yeah. It's Marquis Smith. You might have heard of people.
That's it. Yeah.
Sadly died a couple of years ago, which was, sad, really unsurprising given that he
given his lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they started, I think, in the late 70s and were literally still going up till his death. So we're talking like 4 decades of music, 45, 50 studio albums. He was, still churning out like an album a year, even as he was into 60.
Takes some doing, doesn't it? Yeah.
Amazing. And constantly reinventing themselves, never ran out of things to say. Weird, nasty, acerbic, kind of spiky poetry, weird lyrics. And,
so which would you take a sort of playlist, a general playlist, or would you have a particular album?
But my favourite, on balance, my favourite Fall album is I think it's the 3rd album. It's called Grotesque After the Gram. It's just got they're all got weird names. And it's just got probably my favourite overall collection of Fall songs is on that album. But there's one I think called New Face in Hell that's if you take nothing else away from this rambling, my ramblings, then listen to that.
Listen to that soundtrack on YouTube or whatever, or Spotify. Yeah, so that's great. That's an interesting one, and I don't think we've had that one chosen before, so that's great. And what about you? You also get to take along a DVD. So obviously, DVD can be like a film, it can be a TV series, or anything, a music concert, whatever it may be. So what would you choose to take as your DVD?
So I'm going for one of my favorite movies, and it felt thematically relevant because it's an interesting structure of a story again, and that's what I like, as you can tell, is the movie Memento by the Christopher Nolan movie. Before Christopher Nolan went a bit off the boil, in my opinion. Just again, controversial view, but he had a phase where he was like, I think he's made 3 of my all-time favorite films: The Prestige, The Dark Knight, and Memento. And yeah, Memento is one of his sort of, before he was really big, kind of, before he made Inception, which I hate. But anyway, I'll again direct all your hate mail to.
So what is it about Memento that gets you, so to speak?
I think it's just how clever it is again. So it's a story about a man with short-term memory loss. So his experience of life is he had a traumatic event several years prior to the film's start, and since then he gets smashed in the head. He can't retain any short-term memory. So he knows his name, he knows where he's from, he remembers his wife, who's sadly dead. So that's really tragic, and so on. He knows Leonard Shelby, but he hasn't got a clue what he's been up to for the last few years, apart from what he can scribble down on little notes and tattoos. He's got tattoos all over himself to remind himself what he's doing, Polaroids that he snaps and writes little notes on. So it's quite a sad character.
Yeah.
And he's trying to solve, again, it's a detective story in a way. He's trying to catch the person who killed his wife. But how would you do that when you can't even remember where you've been? Well, of course, if you were just watching that and it was told chronologically and he was just, every 5 minutes he just went, oh, where am I? That would get a bit tiresome. Genius way to fix that is to just show the story in reverse. So we, like him, we know where he's just woken up, for want of a better phrase, and then we know what happens, but we've no idea where he was 10 minutes prior until the next scene. And then that tells us, it makes the film quite hard to follow the first.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah,
it's piecing it together is kind of part of the fun. You know what I mean?
Full concentration involved there. Yeah, but you'll have plenty of time to watch it on the island. So
exactly. I'll have to watch it. I'll know it.
So Yeah, you can
cut it and paste it.
pick it apart. Yeah, you can pick it apart. So that's great. So memento for your DVD. Now the next item we've got is a food item. Now it can be a food or an ingredient, and because it's a fantasy island, it can keep reappearing. So it might be your mum's favourite hot pot or whatever it might be, and it'll keep reappearing. So what are you going to take for either a food or food ingredient?
Well, I'm hoping that I can bend the rules. This might technically be two foods, but it's one of them is on the other. It's Marmite on brown toast. That's
Marmite on brown toast. Wow. And what is it about Marmite on brown toast that floats your boat, so to speak?
Just the tastiest food in it. It's just clearly it's the best food. I think I was just brought up on Marmite for whatever reason from a very young age. So to me, it's like I eat, and there's so many products now, like spin-offs, you know, Marmite cheese and Marmite hummus, and
oh dear, Marmite cheese sounds disgusting.
You can get Marmite shower gel, which I've got. No.
Marmite shower gel, whatever next.
Not edible, of course.
So Marmite on brown toast, you want a sort of an endless supply of that?
That would be great. I could survive easily on that.
Well, that is definitely something different, John. I don't think we've ever had anything like that as a food. So I'm slightly scared to ask now. What is your luxury item going to be?
It's my PlayStation 2 with probably with Silent Hill 2 on it.
But you only get an hour a day.
Well, the game probably takes about 4 hours to complete. So I'd have it every week. I could complete Silent Hill 2. There you go. I'd be happy with that.
Yeah. So good planning. So a PlayStation 2 for your luxury item. Well, you've got quite a heavy suitcase now, so it's time to get you ready and get you off to the island. But before we do, we'll just sort of get you to, just for anyone who's come on late or just watching part of this, just to remind us about your books, where they can contact you, if you're doing any sort of appearances in the near future, where people can come along and see you and have a chat or anything like that. So away you go.
I will do. Thank you. Thanks again, Joe. It's been a pleasure to talk through all the, it was putting that list together was loads of fun, actually.
Great.
I'm Jon Richter. I write books, all dark and sinister across multiple genres. You can find out more. Just Google Jon Richter look me up on Amazon. You'll find all the stuff. My website is www.jon-richter.com, or I'm on Twitter @RichterWrites. They're probably the best couple of places. Would love to get more eyeballs onto my books and my fiction. I do have a upcoming. I should have mentioned this earlier. In a couple of weeks at the time of recording, I've got a book, I have a short story in a cyberpunk anthology coming out. Right. So Neo Cyberpunk Volume 2. So that's my latest thing that's coming.
And when's that issued?
It's January the 26th. So that's available.
So it's less than a week away, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So that's just a group of kind of a lot of different cyberpunk writers, some American, some from different countries. I'm sort of honoured to have been invited to contribute to that, really. I've had a go at a comedy for that one, like a kind of cyberpunk comedy. So we'll see how that
goes. Yeah, see how that one goes. And any, now as sort of things are opening up a bit, any events?
Definitely worth plugging. I'll be at Tales on Trent in May. Now, I've never been to one of these writer festivals before. I have no idea what to do or how it works. I assume I'll sit there with a stall and people will walk past and I'll go, "Hey, buy my book, excuse me," and they'll sort of and kind of run off. But if anybody wants to avoid that outcome and wants to come and talk to me, that would be a pleasure. And that's in Donna, our guest on the show, probably knows better than me exactly where that is. But
well, we will ask Donna now to explain, and also Donna gets the opportunity, as she's come along as a guest, she gets the opportunity to ask you any questions. But I know Donna interviewed you, was it last week or a week before? So so everybody needs to watch that as well on YouTube. So Donna, tell us more about Tales on Trent.
So Tales on Trent is on the 14th of May It's at a hotel in Stoke, which I should know, but I don't off the top of my head. Considering I help it organise it. It is a multi-genre author signing event. So there's romance, there's crime fiction, horror, and there's a guy that writes war stories. And yeah, it will be, everyone will have a table, you can have banners and your books. We're going to have something called a magic mirror, so that people can have their pictures taken with props and things. And I'm going to be hosting panels, apparently.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
so I'm not quite sure how I've been roped into that, but there we go.
Good. That'll be fun.
I'm looking forward to that even more now. That sounds good. Can't wait.
Yeah. So yeah, it should be really good fun, and everyone's really looking forward to it. And it's our first event, and we don't know what we're doing either, so we're all going to be winging it, and it'll be fine.
That's it. That's great. So everybody needs to put that date in the diary as well. So based on Jon's varied choices, shall we say, this evening, have you any questions you'd like to ask him about his choices?
Weirdly, I don't think so. I'm not actually really surprised by any. I knew one book that would definitely be there because Jon's raved about it for years since I've known him. So yeah, I don't think so. I think it's been great fun, and thank you.
And have you read any of the books that Jon's chosen?
I've read Lee Child. I've read all of his as well.
Oh,
and obviously one of my choices was one of Jon's books. So everybody should read that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so brilliant. Well, thank you, Jon, for coming along this evening and telling us all about your books, and we hope you have a great time on the island, and thanks for Donna coming along as a guest as well. So have a great time on the island. Don't look after yourself, because that case will be very heavy. Suitcase will be very heavy.
I suppose it means I can work out a bit and try and keep
you won't be able to lift it. You're such a wing. You're an accountant. You're never going to be able to take it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it'll have wheels on it, thankfully. That's what, I'll definitely.
Brilliant. So, right, well, thank you both very much. It's been a great session, and we really enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great time on the island.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. See ya. Bye-bye.
See you soon.